Hey everyone, this is Wendy White from Georgia Tech's Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Thanks so much for joining us today when we talk about how to make safe sauces and dressings, especially for producers here in Georgia. First, let me take a second to introduce to you the Georgia MEP food team. Of course, there's myself, Wendy White. Prior to joining Georgia Tech about 5 years ago, I spent about 17 years in the food manufacturing industry. My partner, Andrea Hines, has also spent many years in the food manufacturing industry and most recently the auditing industry. So combined, we have a lot of expertise around food services of all types. I wanted to start out by telling you just a little bit about the Georgia MEP. We are a university extension department that is state and federally funded to provide trainings, services, and events to Georgia manufacturers. So let's get on with today's webinar. Today, we're going to discuss how to get your sauce business started, what is an acidified food, and how does that pertain to sauces? Understanding the regulations, especially those around shelf-stable sauces and dressings. We're going to talk about different food safety controls for acidified foods, and then talk about how you go about working with a process authority and registering your process filing with the FDA. And if you don't understand any of those terms, don't worry, we're going to go through them in detail. Now, starting a food business in Georgia is a lot like starting any other business. So let's start with the basic business licensing steps. Now, these steps can easily be found in more detail in the UGA Small Business Development Center's website. So you just Google UGA SBDC Guide to Starting a Business in Georgia, and this PDF will pop up. It's a wealth of information, so I highly encourage you to reach out for that resource. But basically, starting a food business in Georgia, you'll first file with the Georgia Secretary of State on their website. You'll register your business with your county and city. Then you'll apply for a federal tax employee ID number. It's called the EIN, and that is to make sure that the feds get their taxes. And of course, the states want their taxes too, so you'll have to fill out a Georgia sales tax number form. And finally, if you have employees or you're going to look to hire some soon, you'll want to register for an employment eligibility verification form. So again, all of those are very common steps to starting any kind of business in Georgia, and more information can be found on that SBDC Guide to Starting a Business in Georgia resource. All right, so specifically to food businesses, there are a couple different food licenses that you need to know about. So specific to sauces and dressings, a common question that we get is, can I make these in my home, maybe to sell locally at a farmer's market or something like that? And unfortunately, the answer is no. You must produce sauces and dressings in a commercial kitchen, and you must get a Georgia Department of Agriculture food sales establishment for license for manufacturers. You can see a quick screenshot of the GDA website right there. And also there is the URL. You must also register with the FDA, even if you're just selling this locally. And we're going to talk about more about how to do that a little bit later on. So quickly, there's a couple different types of places that you can produce. We already said that unfortunately with shelf-stable sauces and dressings, you cannot produce those out of your home. You must do so in a shared, a commercial kitchen, but there are a couple different options. There's a shared kitchen in which it's a commercial kitchen, but the equipment and the space is shared with a bunch of different companies. Usually you rent them by the hour. And it's a great way for small businesses starting out because you share the overhead with different companies. Also, the shared kitchen is the one that will have that inspection. You still need to register with GDA, but you don't have to worry about the inspection because the shared kitchen will take care of all of that. Now, the next one is a co-manufacturer or co-packer. And so this is a company where you give them the recipe and they make the product for you. So it's different because in a shared kitchen, you're the one that's making your product just in a shared space. With a co-manufacturer, co-packer, they're making the product for you. And then, of course, you can produce out of your own dedicated facility. It doesn't have to be something big like this. There are a lot of different opportunities. Now, if you get that GDA license, there are some basic food safety requirements. You've probably heard about these already. GDA requires that you have a 3-compartment sink, a separate hand washing sink, a mop sink for cleanup, have to have access to restrooms. The floors, walls, and ceilings of the operational area need to be smooth and easy to clean, no wood, and you have to have a pest control program. Continuing these food safety requirements, you have to have potable water. That means safe to drink. And this can be through city municipal, and you could also have a well water that is connected with that commercial kitchen, but you'll have to do some testing. You have to make sure there's hot water available and good plumbing. You also have to have an approved sewage system. And some counties and cities require grease traps, even if you don't have grease associated with your processing. So check those county and city ordinances. You have to have adequate hot or cold storage if that's part of your process. And you have to take a ServSafe class. That's a class on food safety basics. But for those of you that are processing shelf stable, that means room temperature sauces and dressings, in addition to that ServSafe class, you'll also have to take a better process control class. Now, we're going to make the differentiation between refrigerated sauces and dressings and shelf stable or room temperature sauces and dressings, because with refrigerated sauces and dressings, you don't have to do a lot of these things. So if you had a refrigerated product, you would not need to take this better process control class. Now let's talk about what to expect on these GDA inspections. So GDA is going to do an initial facility inspection when you first register with them. They're going to check the plant, the facility, the equipment. They're going to look over your paperwork. You might have a food safety plan. And they're also going to look for the certificate of occupancy. Now, GDA will come back every 1 to 3 years, just kind of depending on the risk of your product, how safe it is. And they might possibly come back for for-cause inspections, which are fairly rare, but this is if there's a consumer complaint, an outbreak, or some type of problem they need to investigate. Now let's take a better look at understanding acidified foods. Now we lump sauces and dressings often into this category of acidified foods. And the reason why we use that terminology is that's the terminology that the GDA and the FDA use. So first, some quick definitions. I'm going to talk about pH a lot. And pH is a measure of acid, like vinegars, and alkaline products, like mushrooms. So acid and basic chemistry. Water activity is another term we'll use, and this is different than moisture. Water activity is the measure of available water that pathogens can use, so microorganisms. And a good example of the difference between moisture and water activity is that salt water might be high in moisture, but bacteria can't use it because the salt ions are binding all of the available water, so they won't grow in high instances of salt water, even though it's still high moisture. So water activity is really the thing that we're looking at. Now, acid foods are foods that have a natural pH of 4.6 or below. So 4.6 is kind of that magic pH number, and it's very, very important, especially for sauces and dressings. Low acid foods are foods other than alcoholic beverages with a finished equilibrium of greater than 4.6 and a water activity of greater than 0.85. And so instances of low acid foods can be things like a beef stew, which you have to be very, very careful of. And that's something that at room temperature, bacteria love to grow in. Now, the reason why we're so concerned about sauces and dressings, especially those that are stored at room temperature, are they're really complex. They're formulated foods, and some are considered acid foods, but some are considered acidified foods. Now, the reason for that is that a lot of sauces and dressings have particulates or chunks, really large pieces of ingredients, maybe onion pieces or tomato pieces. And these are sitting in some type of acid usually a vinegar for a sauce. And the vinegar, that acid, might not be able to penetrate into those chunks. And so if there's any bacteria, maybe in those onion pieces, the acid might not be enough to kill the bacteria. And as you know, at room temperature, bacteria love to grow. So we have to be really cautious in controlling the bacteria. And so these foods that are low acid but contain are high acid but contain low acid chunks or ingredients are considered acidified foods. So it's a mix of both. Now, why should we worry about that? It's because there have been multiple outbreaks associated with sauces and dressings. So this was from one, it was a salsa outbreak a couple years ago. Now let's take a deeper dive into this water activity measurement. So pathogens need a certain amount of water to survive. And a really good illustration is beef jerky versus raw beef. One of them is considered pretty safe when stored at room temperature. That's the beef jerky because it's used dehydration and also sometimes adding salt and sugar to lower that water activity so that bacteria can't grow. Fresh beef doesn't have that. And so bacteria would love to grow on fresh beef, especially if it's kept at room temperature for a long time. And this is why beef jerky is usually safer than raw beef. Now, refrigeration is also a very important control for food products. Bacteria normally stop growing at temperatures less than 40 degrees. So you've probably seen this this food temperature danger zone higher than 40, but below 140 degrees. And so that's when bacteria really love to grow. If you make a refrigerated product, you do not have to do a special FDA process filing. So if you make a refrigerated product, a refrigerated sauce or dressing, the refrigeration is considered an adequate control. So you don't have to do all this other extra stuff. You still have to register with the GDA, and you still have to make sure that they're aware you can't produce in your home kitchen, but you don't have to mess with the FDA unless you're crossing state lines. Now, the acidified method is often used to kill pathogens. Bacteria will stop growing at a pH of less than 4.6. And so again, we see that 4.6 is that magical pH number. But sauces and dressings often contain low acid ingredients, which are high pH. I know it's kind of confusing. And that best example for us, like a barbecue sauce might have onion chunks, and onions have a pretty high pH. They are not acidic. So the acid might not be able to penetrate into those pieces, and pathogens can grow at room temperatures. Now let's look at our last control, thermal processing. This is very often used if you want to make a shelf-stable or room temperature sauce or dressing. And the most common method is the hot fill hold method. And basically, a lot of these sauces, you cook them like barbecue sauce, and then while the liquid is still hot, you'll pour it into the container, close the lid. Usually you'll turn it over so that that hot liquid can sanitize the entire surface of the packaging. It can get the inner lid all around the bottle, and that will kill any pathogens that are in there. And so there's a couple different time temperatures that are allowable, but don't worry, you can get help in trying to figure out exactly what processing steps are going to be appropriate for your recipe and your packaging. So again, let's review these definitions. Acid foods are foods that have a natural pH of 4.6 or below. They don't have any low acid components. So if you're doing something that doesn't have any low acid, it's all high acid ingredients, that is considered an acid food. Low acid foods are foods that have a finished equilibrium of greater than 4.6. So you'll notice on our previous slide, they had blended this chunky salsa to get the true pH of the product. So by blending it really smooth, they got the pH of the acid ingredients and the low acid ingredients. And acidified foods, which are very often the category that sauces and dressings fall into, means that low acid foods, which acid or acid foods is added, and they have a finished equilibrium, so that blended equilibrium of 4.6 or below. So when you count the acidic ingredients and the non-acidic ingredients, they all equal below 4.6. And remember that foods that are stored, distributed, and retailed under refrigeration are excluded from the rules that we're about to talk about. So the acidified foods regulation is the FDA regulation that oversees sauces and dressings. Again, only ones that you're going to make, store, and sell under shelf stable or room temperature conditions. So if you store it in the pantry, these are the things you have to do. There's a couple different regulations here. 21 CFR 110 is the current good manufacturing practices for human foods. So that's really applicable to all foods, all human foods. 21 CFR 113 is thermal processing for low acid foods in hermetically sealed containers. So things like canned beef stew, canned soups. And then lastly, 21 CFR 114 is the regulation that proceeds over acidified foods. So this is the one that all of you are going to be interested in. And I highly recommend you Google FDA 21 CFR 114 and it'll pop up and read through the regulation. It's really not that bad. It's not that long at all. So non-refrigerated, this is room temperature acidified foods must be made under a scheduled process. That terminology is really important, scheduled process, so that the food won't permit the growth of pathogens. And this has to be determined by an FDA recognized person called a process authority. Now you can go on the FDA website and look up process authorities, and I'll introduce you to a few in Georgia here in a second. But you aren't allowed to decide the time temperature that you process these shelf-stable sauces and dressings. A process authority is the one who will tell you that. Acidified food shall be manufactured, processed, and packaged so that the equilibrium pH is less than or equal to 4.6 within the scheduled time. So when you boil your sauce, you have so much time in which to fill up your bottles or containers. A few more definitions that'll be really important. Commercial sterility. This is sterilizing equipment and containers used for aseptic processing and packaging of foods. So hot fill and hold is not the same as aseptic processing. This is when everything is sanitized using special, usually really expensive equipment. But you can store these foods on the shelf, no refrigeration needed. And again, aseptic processing and packaging is when you use that special equipment and you fill it a pre-sterilized container with a pre-sterilized liquid or food. And usually you do this when the food is cold. But again, this is not hot fill and hold. Just wanted to make sure you understand the difference. So if you get, milk that is shelf stable, that URT milk or the URT milkshakes, the diet milkshakes and things like that, those are aseptically processed. but most sauces and dressings are not. A lot of sauces and dressings are used the hot fill and hold method. Now, how do you know what processing method to use? You don't have to worry. All you need is a special person, a process authority. So here is our process authority in Georgia is Dr. Caitlin Kasuli. She is a professor over at UGA's Food Science and Technology Department, and she can help you get a letter of process approval. So you'll go to that website or you'll contact Dr. Kasuli. You'll give her your recipe, tell her about your processing steps, your packaging, your controls, your storage, give her all the information. She'll test your product, the pH, the water activity, maybe the Brix, which is sugar content, and she will give you that letter of process approval. Now, usually that's around $175 per recipe per packaging type, but don't hold that against me because depending on when you see this recording, that might have changed. But it's not too expensive. But make sure you understand this has to be done for every type of recipe. So if you have 3 different flavors, all 3 flavors need their own separate letter of process approval. Same thing with different size containers, jars, jugs, what have you. Every different type of container or different size container, you have to have a separate letter of process approval. And that letter of process approval is going to be needed because you're going to send that to the Georgia Department of Agriculture and you're going to file it with the FDA. And I'll tell you exactly how to do that. You also need to attend a Better Process Control School, and UGA has one several times a year. Now, let's look at the contents of that process letter that you'll be getting from your process authority. Now, you can see here, these are just some sections that I've cut out of a letter, but you can see they've told you exactly what your temperatures are, your maximum, your minimum temperature, your hold times, the pH, and the different container type. So all of this information was just from one type of recipe, one type of container, and the comments, the processor is recommended to file a scheduled process, which is Form 2541E. So that's really nice information to know. So this is telling us we're going to cook it at least 207 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 27 minutes, then hot fill the jars and invert them. Now, the last part, once you get that process letter, is filing it with the FDA. So you can do this online. It's pretty easy. It helps to know exactly what form to fill out, but the FDA requires a separate process filing for each recipe and each type of packaging. And you have to refile if there's a change to the recipe, a change to the packaging type or size, a change to your process steps, or if you decide to move and process in a different location. So just be cognizant of that. Okay, let's look at the forms. There's a couple different forms and they can be confusing, but I really wanted to simplify it and explain each one. So Form 2541D, that's when you have a low acid food. Remember we said like beef stew, a soup, and you use a retort method, and that is usually canning. So that's really not sauces and dressings. Form 2541E, that's when you use the acidified method, and that's probably the one that most of you are going to use. Form 2541F is when you use water activity or formulation to control, like if you have a really high salt product or something like that. Then, of course, 2541G is when you have the low acid aseptic systems. And we talked about that, those Tetra Pak products that you might see on the grocery store shelves. And again, you have to submit a separate form for each recipe and each different pack size. So just a couple final thoughts. If you are first starting out, refrigeration might be a good choice for you because you don't have to worry about the process filing. You don't have to worry about the process authority or register with the FDA, that process letter. You don't have to do any of those steps with refrigeration. You still have to use good manufacturing practices, which we refer to as GMPs. So you have to produce your food in a safe manner, no matter if it's going to be refrigerated or if it's going to be room temperature. But if you decide you want to go with room temperature and you're going to get your process authority and you're going to get your letter and you're going to file it with the FDA, make sure you have perfected your recipe and you know exactly which type of packaging you're going to use before you go through that filing process. Because if you change something, you're going to have to change it and start all over. And no one wants to do that. So make sure that you have a really good handle on what you're going to do before you go through that, which is why I advise people usually to go refrigeration at first. And then once they really get it perfected, then take the steps so that they can produce shelf stable or room temperature products. We'd love for you to keep in touch. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Hopefully you got all the information that you need. Snap a picture of this QR code if you'd like to register for our newsletter. We do all types of classes. Some are even free or really low cost, paid for by federal sponsors. We do a lot of workshops. We have a getting into retail workshop. It's called Taking Your Food Business to the Next Level. Great workshop. We did it last year and was really, really popular. We also have some networking nights for food founders. So if you want to talk to your fellow food entrepreneurs or do a little sampling, those nights are really, really fun. And then, of course, we have our annual Georgia Regulatory Breakfast event, and that's usually in November, but the newsletter will give you all of that information. So this has been a Food Safety Friday webinar. We're going to be doing them quarterly, and all the recordings will go on the Georgia MEP YouTube channel. So definitely check us out and see some of our upcoming recordings. So again, at Georgia MEP, we have regional managers all across the state, and these are experts at finding local resources. So if you're looking for a processing facility, looking for a shared kitchen or a local supplier for something, they are excellent. You can scan that QR code to find out who the regional manager is in your county. Georgia MEP doesn't just do food safety, although I'm biased. We're really good at that. We do food safety, regulatory compliance, quality, but we also do a couple other things: automation, cybersecurity, leadership training, process improvement, Lean Six Sigma supply chain, and sustainability. So all different types of things we can help you with. And the best way to find that is to reach out to your regional manager. So again, thank you so much. We hope you really enjoyed this presentation. Hopefully it was informative. If you need to get a hold of us, do not hesitate. Myself, Wendy White, my partner, Andrea, you can snap these QR codes. This is our virtual business card. And please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're always happy to answer questions, help you find a resource, or if you need a more in-depth consulting project, we can do that too. Thanks so much. Bye.